Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week. I am Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
And this week we're going to have kind of a loose focus on flow. And how do we achieve that? What does it mean? Implications, all the good stuff.
All that.
And you got a quote.
Got a quote from, it's in Shigeo Shingo, Key Strategies for Plant Improvement, and he's quoting a professor, an unspecified professor he had in school. Speed is fine as far as it goes, but velocity requires a direction component. So as you're swimming, you've got to raise your head from time to time to check to make sure you're moving toward your objectives. This is basically, that speed isn't important. It needs to be velocity, which I thought was
right.
Or a good point.
Speed without a direction is not helpful. Or it might be helpful
potentially
for a short
harmful.
time.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that in all of this, I mean, it's sort of hard to take to heart fully, but basically everything I've seen on lean, TPS, all that, is that you should not focus on speed, which is confusing because I feel like the reason you get into this is often because you need to get more done, right? Or something, or you're like, it's so hectic. How do I improve my efficiency? And efficiency is sort of output per time measurement.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to not focus on the time aspect. Yeah. But the argument is kind of that if you do focus on speed, you're basically just stressing your human yourself or your employees or everyone involved, and that you're kind of counting on like vigilance and performance. I don't know if performance is the word, instead of improving systems to just make everything easier, more mistake proof.
Yeah.
And then
we had some listener conversation this past week about the operations versus process thing.
Yeah, I actually met that guy at this the gravel event this past weekend. Yeah,
that's cool.
That's fun.
And I think so that kind of what you're speaking about sort of points towards the same thing. And then I read the goal, or most of the goal, this last week.
Yeah. And
I know it's fiction, so you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But I thought a very good portrayal of that point was when in the book they reduced batch sizes by half and then reduced them again. There was no discussion of SMED or anything like that.
Okay.
They were just make these systems these operations less efficient. We're just going to do more setups. We're not going to try and shorten our setups.
Interesting.
We're just going to do more of them, but we're going to reduce our batch size and achieve more flow. Granted, again, it's fiction, but I thought that just kind of was a good way to illustrate the point that sometimes these things are very much at odds, where overall plant efficiency can come from actually reducing operation efficiency.
I see that all the time. I mean, we've talked about it as it relates to our milling machine and how increasing the number of changeovers meant we didn't need a mill.
Yeah.
A second mill. Also in the paint department, painting one color is so much more efficient.
Yeah.
But it drives massive inventories everywhere else.
Yeah. So I think, people, maybe myself included, are just still having a hard time wrapping. I'm sure we'll always be wrapping our head around this concept.
Yeah. And some of it has to do with, I think, making spreadsheets. So spreadsheets are useful, right? So I've been deep in spreadsheets trying to figure out a very... a big quote, and you want to get these things right.
Yeah.
And each line item has to do with time, right? So it's sort of how many do we do an hour, and then that's sort of what we need to charge. So I feel like the way you're measuring things is very much in the time world, and so it's hard to not get sucked into that as a focus.
Yeah.
To go from, wow, if we could do 50 of these per hour instead of 30. That would mean this for our cost of goods. That would be huge. To not then walk out on the floor and go all right, chop, let's go. Is hard.
Yeah, totally. Well, to jump into it, I had it's not a revelation. The information was all there all this time, but
Isn't it always?
never bothered to like measure it. So I had posted on Instagram, and we discussed a couple weeks back the like progress pages or time monitoring pages on the Brother machines, and they list average in cycle time as a percentage of on time for every day they're on.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I gotta open these pages.
Yeah. So it's it's kind of like a rough number, but I think like it's not a very granular number. It's a very high level number, or like high level view. It doesn't necessarily tell you a lot about the specifics, but I think it is a really good, just kind of overview. And the numbers in our shop are all over the place. So I was like, I should see what the average of it records the last 20 days that it was on.
Gotcha.
I should see what the average is. So I added up one of our S700s, so just a 3-axis vertical. And then I added up the second one. They've been running entirely different work.
Okay.
Like nothing similar at all. And their cycle uptime percentage was within 0.75% of each other.
No way.
And I was like, well, that either it was total random chance,
right,
or there's very significant like outside constraints that are like defining that number, which 20 days is not a huge sample size, but it's also not nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of leaning towards the second option, that that it is a constraint in our system. And those numbers were 46.25% and 47%, which was kind of a bummer at first.
Yeah.
And then so just for kicks, I was like, quick dive into this, like where's this time coming from? And then I did this rough calculation that if you assume that every cycle the machine waits 2 minutes before somebody notices and comes to the machine, and then it takes another 2 minutes, which is for them to change the part and hit cycle start again. So 4 minutes down per cycle, which I think is fairly realistic, unless if you have somebody parked at the machine, like just standing there, bet you can get a lot of part changes down to a minute or maybe a little less. But
or if you have pneumatic 0 point.
Sure. Even that, I think if you actually stand there, I've done some of this with 0 point stuff and stood there with a stopwatch and with a human operator opening the door, moving things out of the machine back in quick, like everything's tight, close the door. Like it's hard to get under 45 seconds.
Fair. Gotta get a pit crew in there.
Yeah, pretty much. So anyway, if you have 30 parts a day and you have that 4 minute downtime per cycle, that is 25% of your day. That
is downtime.
Is not cutting time.
Okay.
If you have 60 parts per day, so a shorter cycle time, and you have that same 4 minute downtime per cycle, it's 50% of your day the machine spends not cutting.
Wow. So this really points to those R machines, pallet changers.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's sort of a stopgap, but yes.
That shaves. Well, it takes it all out of.
Yeah. No, it's big. So I expect this to go down once we finish. We're about a week away from finishing this job that we've been running since the end of January.
Wow.
And so aside from little issues we've had, like a broken tool here or there, and then like when we do the new parts, it's like 6 part numbers in a family, but they all use the same fixed string.
Okay.
So like swapping over to a new part is pretty seamless. That machine has been running an average over the last 20 days of 84% uptime.
Wow.
And there were a couple, like we had an issue this last week where I think about a quarter, maybe a little less, of the material we ordered was was bent.
Oh God.
Warped from its own internal stresses. And so we'd been kind of like setting it aside.
Okay.
Because this has happened in the past and we've bent it flat. And then we went to start bending it flat and it was like not working.
Damn.
So we had to go find a friend with a press. And then, so the operator had spent the day out, two half days out of the shop, bending the plate back. So that, I'm sure, killed our number a little bit. Even so. I expect it to go down with setups, but it is.
What's the price difference on those machines? Is it around 30%?
Yeah, I think it is. Now that you mention it.
Interesting.
Maybe not quite. I think an S is around, is it mid-80s?
Depends on the size, I think. Yeah.
Maybe it is
base.
30%. I think a base price on an R for the smaller one is like 115, maybe 110.
Okay. So, yeah.
Right
in there.
In that pocket.
Yeah, but of course, floor space wise, it doesn't. Well, it could be 30% increase. I wonder.
I don't think it's that much bigger.
Yeah. So, rent is substantial. When I was in my shop in Pittsburgh, I was looking at all this used equipment, where a lot of the used equipment that's dirt cheap is enormous and has huge power requirements.
Yeah.
Right, because no one wants it.
Yeah.
Like often I would see like 3-phase huge industrial machine go for the same price as like a Delta bandsaw.
Yeah.
That everyone can just plug it in the garage. So I wrote a sign on the door that was like how much I was paying per year per square foot. Because then you'd calculate it out and it's like, yeah, I'm saving a lot of money, but that savings is going to be gone after a year and a half.
Yeah.
So no.
Yeah. I was shopping for air compressors like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And it was like stuff like, you know, a Husky carry around or like a 400 horsepower industrial air compressor with a diesel engine on a skid.
Yeah.
You're like, neither of those
yeah.
what I want.
That's tough. That's very interesting, though, to actually see hard numbers on it. I mean, I guess it's a little, hearing you explain, I mean, this
is a very simplistic view, too. I don't think.
But that's kind of useful because.
It is useful. It gives you something. I don't, like, right now, I don't think the downtime in cycle is what we're trying to tackle. Like, it'd be great if there was not a 2-minute delay for the operator to arrive. Okay. But, like, I don't think that's our major constraint at this point.
Okay.
I think a large, like, you know, similar to driving, like, you can go 60 miles an hour, and if you don't stop, you're going to get there before going 70, but stopping every whatever for 10 minutes kind of a thing. Where was I going with that? I think, you know, our changeovers and setups, I think, are like those stopping for 10 minutes things right now.
I could see that. I mean, I'm not there. Are you saying like if anything doesn't sort of go seamlessly?
With our setups. Yeah, I think there's more to be gained right now in our overall efficiency by reducing setup times and changeovers from part to part. It's like a less expensive lift than buying a bunch of robots or something to 10 machines.
That makes sense.
Do you have a quote you're going to read?
I just read a different piece that made me think of what we were talking about because he says a tag is this is also Shigeo Shingo, Strategies for Plant Improvement. A tag is said to be a tool that transports intentions through space.
As in a Kanban? Is that what he's talking about?
Well, I was sort of thinking about like information flow and then whereas a register is a tool that transports intentions in time. It follows then that a tag can be eliminated by bringing the senders and the receivers of intentions closer to one another. And registers can be eliminated by reducing the time involved in transmitting intentions. But that is by taking immediate action. And I was just thinking about it in terms of like getting those setups dialed is all about like good information passing.
Yes.
But I was sort of thinking after that thought of like how do you document it and how do you improve the documentation. It's always worth bearing in mind that not making those documents is actually more efficient. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think I don't know. It's hard to.
No, I struggle with that for sure. Every time I'm like putting setup notes in our setup sheets, and I'm like, me writing this out is just like a lot of waste.
Yeah.
But for where we are at this time, in our business and our
Right.
skill set and flow and everything. Like, I think this is less waste than us having to be next to each other talking about it when that's maybe not convenient for either person.
Yeah. Also, it seems like an easier thing to improve than having no baseline.
Yes, it's easier to improve and it's systemizable.
Yeah.
Which I guess you could systemize like a
And
little
scalable
meeting, but it's not a lot better anyway.
Right.
So I think for us specifically, I think this is a good number to have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as I think towards automation, be like, that's what we're attacking. And
so you're attacking those 4 minutes, or you're attacking, I assume, the 4 minutes?
The automation, I feel like automated part loading would attack the 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But right now, I think we need to attack the like hour here and there.
So interestingly, in my experience, and so far, is that the automation you think will attack those changeovers.
The changeover? The part
Yeah. Changing.
Yeah.
And it sort of does, but I can't decide if it's attacking the 4 minutes or attacking those like mistakes in the day where it's like, oh shit, that machine sat for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Yeah. Or because often the cycles are kind of slower, but then you can run them more hours in the day. Yeah. You can like leave them to run into the night. Like there's this other, I don't know. So it's interesting. I wonder if your per part time, including that part change, goes down with automation or...
No, I think...
Or if it sort of slightly increases, but you end up just running a massive amount in the day.
I think like when I'm adding on that 2 minute average delay for an operator, like I think that's an average because often they're sooner.
Right.
And then sometimes
you're in the middle
like
of something.
They're out sawing material and something goes wrong with the saw and all of a sudden the machine sits for half an hour.
Yep.
And then you just added a minute to every cycle.
Right. And okay, I see. As an average, that makes sense.
I think it's more that kind of picture. I've had the same experience with the automation we've run where, in general, if you just sit there with a stopwatch and time cycles, in an ideal world, a person's faster.
Yeah.
But they're less consistent.
I was watching some footage of robots doing part loading. Yeah. The spindle grippers that we're running are so much faster. Yeah. That's pretty crazy.
I think a robot plus R machine is probably like an N.
And the R machine just has a switching table. So there's one table that's being used and then the other table is free for like a robot or an operator to kind of load and unload without slowing down the machine.
Yeah. Which I think would be really cool because robots are pretty slow if they're reliable. And it would give a lot of time for all of the things to be done well by the robot. Yeah,
it'd be pretty awesome because often programming for automation, you're sort of in this unfortunate position of trading process reliability for cycle time. So it's like, do we probe for the stock to know it's in the right position, or do you just assume it is and know what will happen if it's not, or like all this stuff. Whereas if you weren't pressed for time, you could do so much validation without it being a trade-off at all. Yeah. Which would be pretty sweet.
Yeah. I've been having thoughts about selling current machines to buy different machines. I probably need to spreadsheet it. It's like a little outside of my comfort zone thinking through the financials of it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Like part of me is like, if you have not that machines are paid off, but one of them's about to be, if you have a paid off machine that's capable of making money for another 20 years or even 10 years. Right. It seems crazy to sell it at a pretty low comparatively low cost to then take on another payment and not add capability, but maybe not capacity. Depending on
if you're looking at revenue capacity instead of part capacity, then the added capability, hopefully.
That's true. Don't convince.
Sorry, oops.
Don't convince me.
Don't do it. No.
But there is a part of me that's like looking at these numbers, being like, okay, we could swap these 3-axis verticals for our machines or 5-axis machines, and like very much increase our capability and throughput capability.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I can't think about that today. I got to do tool tags.
No, those numbers are super interesting, actually, like getting into the specifics of what is actually happening.
Yeah, they're not a complete picture, but they're just like a brief, like, oh, damn. Like, even if there's all these other variables involved, but if it was just that, like half of your potential runtime, like I definitely don't do calculated revenue projections based on 50% uptime. Like I'm in my head, I'm shooting for more than that. And it's like, well, maybe that's not realistic.
Yeah.
Until you add some serious systems in place to bump that up.
That's pretty cool. Interesting. Yeah. So I had just a thought based on some of our previous conversations. And again, I'm looking at this big quote that we may fire off here is, I think a lot of small businesses are constrained, like their actual bottleneck is in time, human labor time.
Yeah. I'm feeling that.
Yeah. And I just wonder how people deal with that. And I'm wondering, like in the goal, Eliyahu Goldratt, basically his thing on like theory of constraints, as I understand it, is figure out what your constraint is and then subordinate all other business functions to that bottleneck. Mm-hmm. / improve the bottleneck, right? Improving the bottleneck in this case is obviously hiring, or reducing the waste in the things
they're doing
that are taking up time.
Yeah,
right. So it's like if we're sweeping every day, it's like, what are we sweeping up?
Yeah.
Can we keep that from ever getting on the floor to begin with, so we don't have to sweep every day?
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Like there's sort of, do you bring in flex labor? Like we've kind of talked about this, right? It's like, if your company has enough labor for, I don't know, like what are you optimizing your labor force for? Is it that peak throughput? Probably not. Is it like 90% throughput? Then you have a lot of slack time. It's just very confusing figuring out.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're in my shop that we're optimizing for anything.
Okay.
We're just kind of like skin of our teeth a little bit on this. Like I've just been kind of adding people very slowly as I felt like I could. Mm-hmm. But I think I've mentioned this on the podcast that I've seen, like every time I've added a person, there's been a big revenue jump.
Yeah.
And once we kind of settle in, I noticed that we kind of hit a cap. And that points to, at least within the system as it currently stands, human labor being a bottleneck.
Right.
And I have been considering hiring another person to ease that.
Yeah.
Along with improving systems. I think there's this tendency to be like, we're just going to improve all the systems to the point where we can do everything with these people.
Right.
But I don't think I'm coming around to the fact that that's not realistic.
Well, even like for me, it's not only that it's not, it is maybe realistic theoretically. I guess realistic and theoretically maybe are not the same. What is it? Theory and practice are the same in theory.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the problem. No, but I don't even have the time to improve all the systems, right? It's like either I can work on like figuring out automating our paint process, or I can work on reducing cycle time on the current product so we can bring in like there's only so much I can do, or
you're already doing 3 other things that have to happen today.
Like I still have to do sales. So or I could improve my process for doing sales to make that more efficient.
Yeah.
And so even if you ignore the work that has to be done and just look at huge potential for improving current processes, I don't even have the time to.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting because I think like we were sort of talking about how do you schedule, like how do you know what to do next in the shop? I think has a lot to do with this, right? How do you optimize that bottleneck resource, which is, I think for me and for a lot of small shops, is human labor. And I suspect similar to your CNC numbers, I bet my numbers are not much better once you look at like switching tasks, like taking a few minutes to walk around to figure out what you should be doing next.
For your people?
For myself.
Yeah, for yourself.
Yeah. Right. Like, I wonder what my uptime looks like. Like, I bet it's just not much better.
Yeah.
And I think, like, knowing exactly what should be done next. And I don't know if that you just, like, it would sort of, I don't know. When I get really busy, and maybe I should just do this all the time. When I get really busy, I write myself out a very clear sort of list, right? And then it's like, I'll do this, and then I'll do that. And I really plan it out, because it's like, okay, I have this many hours to get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
And in just saying that out loud, it is very clear to me that it's probably the answer.
Yeah, I often struggle with the fact that, like, once you sort of, like, trained yourself to orient around stress, it can be hard when the stress is released. In that, like, once the business is in kind of a flow state, to maintain that high level of efficiency. Right. Because, yeah, the pressure's not there. And you're like, well, I could write a list, or I could do, well, let's check my email. Yeah. See what's happening today, you know? And,
interesting.
Yes. So all that to rambly say, I agree. I think creating, it comes back to the systems things of creating systems that tell you what to do.
Yeah. I think my frustration with the idea of writing a list is that ideally the shop should trigger activity, in that it should be a pull system of where is your attention needed. And the act of creating that list is all waste. It's sort of like taking inventory, right? I mean, that's basically what you're doing. You're walking around, you're going like, what do I need to do today? Let me think, let me write that down, let me order those, let me prioritize those. When really, ideally, the shop would kind of tell you, right? It's like, oh, the queue for quotes that need to go out is past the acceptable trigger point, which might be, the acceptable trigger might be 0, right? Because you want to get back to customers really quick.
It sounds like it is telling you, you just don't have, like, the visibility into each individual process. And like, there's no visuals. I think, like, visual controls on every single process, where there's like a green range and then an orange range and then a red range. Sure. And you try to keep everything in green. I think the challenge for me has been, A, making it all visual is tough. B, having very clear thresholds for each thing and very clear work. There's some very ambiguous stuff that I do. Yeah. And that's probably just a cop-out, like a lack of analysis on what those are, right? If I sat down for an hour, I could probably at least group them,
make it a little more clear. But like things like outgoing sales efforts, it's very, like, attribution is really hard, like attributing sales to a particular sales effort. Like if I'm posting on Instagram, say, right, and then someone buys, right, why did they buy? Yeah. Hard to say. Yeah. But I know that activity in, like, you know, writ large, like zoomed out, right? That activity does produce results, and I don't know. So it's not explicit what cadence that needs to be at, which I'm sure it could be. Anyway, it's just, I've had trouble. It's sort of been a recurring theme.
Well, and then there's the whole thing too of where you do develop this system that tells individuals what needs to be done in the shop at any given moment very effectively. There's likely still going to be a point at which you realize there's not enough people to do all these things when they need to be done. Right. And I think that is kind of what I'm finally coming to in my shops. Like, okay, we have these machines, you know, based on a theoretical uptime, we should be able to build as many hours per month. We're doing a half of that, maybe, or less. Yeah. Why? Yeah. And it's really easy to be like, to think you're going to fix everything with the systems. I think it's really good to focus on the systems, because as you add people, that makes that much smoother.
For sure.
But I am definitely coming to a place where I think I need some redundancy in some of these, you know, key skill sets, so that if one person is occupied with another thing that's also critical, there's still somebody who can do this other part that's very critical.
Imagining those red light, you know, the green light, orange light, red light. I feel like the problem is that most stations are on red. Yeah. Except for production. Like, our production flows really well, but I think maybe because it's just the most visible. I don't know why.
So you're saying most of your
Like-
red lights are in like admin stuff?
Admin, sales, email, quotes, like planning other bits.
Do you like specify a time to
No.
work on that?
No.
I've fallen off the wagon, but for a while, just as things got busier. For a while, both my employees were working 4 days a week, and then I was working a fifth, and that was kind of like my admin catch-up day.
And then you're staring at the CNCs being like,
if
I just get a job running real quick, then
I learned pretty quickly that was a non-starter.
Okay, yeah.
But we have gotten to the point where they've started working 5 days a week.
Oh, nice.
And they're keeping things running, and so my
yeah, your 1 day of like solitude and silence is gone.
Yeah. And, overall, that's probably better, I think. But I am having to readjust and figure out how to make those times still.
Yeah. And I think as someone who's, I don't know, running a small business or a big business, well, maybe not a big business, but I think so far I've fixed my problems by working hard.
Yeah.
And that is not necessarily a scalable answer, especially as your available labor represents a smaller percentage of total company capacity. It just doesn't move the needle as much.
Yeah.
Right? Like it used to be, it's like, okay, well, if I just work through the weekend, I can really catch up in a substantial way. And now it's like, yeah, that's helpful for the business. It's not good for my personal life.
Yeah, now I'm just tired.
Yeah, and it didn't actually make a huge dent. It just made a small dent. So
yeah. I thought it was just, since we're on bottleneck still a little bit.
Yeah.
In the goal, the book, the goal. When I'm forgetting that Jonah, is that the character's name?
I think that sounds right. I read it months and months ago.
Yeah. What would you call him? He's like the
plant manager.
No,
the mentor.
The mentor, yeah.
The author.
Yeah, the author. The way he wrote himself into the book.
Yeah.
When he's pointing out when they're doing a calculation on the cost, the cost calculation of their bottleneck machines.
Yeah.
And this is just sort of understood this, but having it kind of driven home was cool. That they were like, oh, it's this burden rate plus the labor rate plus whatever. It's like $35 an hour or something. And Jonah, the mentor, was like, no, 80% of your business goes through this machine, and you do whatever millions of dollars per month. That means that and you have this many running hours per month. That means that a down hour on this machine is X percentage of your total revenue, or 80% of your total revenue is like,
ouch,
$2,700 a month, I think it was in the book, or $2,700 an hour.
Yeah.
And sort of like, I think that's a cool thing to think about your different processes in your shop and how to, or business, whatever, not a shop necessarily, and how to prioritize where labor goes. And, being like, okay, yes, I know it's important to get that email out today, and everything that we make goes through this machine. Do the machine first so that it can run, kind of a thing. And
yeah,
I think it can be hard to systemize some of those priority lists, or those
totally priority, right? It's like if both are triggered, which one happens first?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, so in that book, I mean, a lot of the examples were kind of like, well, have one person work through lunch and then have like stagger who's taking lunch when, right? Like all of those examples assumed, this is sort of why I brought this point up, assumed a physical constraint, right? Like he gives the example of like, if sometimes you have a pile of stock at one machine and sometimes you have a pile of stock at another machine, because one way of finding your bottleneck is looking for stock or inventory.
Work in progress.
Ahead of a process. It could be those machines, but because it moves day to day, it could also be something else. And in that case, it was a forklift. A forklift is still a physical asset, right? You can either get a second one, or oftentimes, I mean, what they ended up doing was, which I thought was interesting, was moving from to moving to smaller containers such that the weight of the container was well within like just carrying it from machine to machine.
Is that a different book?
It was one of his lectures, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's at the end of that book, actually, in the audio form.
Gotcha.
Right. But they're all sort of these physical constraints. I haven't heard him describe one where it is where your bottleneck is labor. And I just don't know. I mean, okay, there's a very simple way of attacking that, which would just be look at all the tasks you do, figure out and make I forget what they call them, but if you make a spreadsheet that's sort of like all the things you spend time on, how much you think you could reduce each process by, and how long it would take you to reduce that process, you can get a very quick list of like, okay, tackle this thing, then that thing, and that will buy you back 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, or, you know, cumulatively you can buy back an hour a day, which, you know, would be huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know. It just seems, I feel like all these books assume, this is, I guess, what I'm getting at. I feel like all of these books assume that your bottleneck is not labor. Or maybe it's that all the bottlenecks are, all the books are written from the point of view of a company who will fix that problem. Right? I guess Toyota does deal a lot with labor. It's like, here's how they deal with peaks and valleys in production, with overtime, with temp workers, with this other stuff. But it's like,
yeah.
So maybe they're just assuming that should never be your bottleneck. I don't know what that, do you know?
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
I don't know.
I think it's especially hard for businesses of our scale because generally the margins are very slim and we don't have a lot of cash flow to play with. So
I think there's that. I think it's also just like, if I bring in a third person, that's now a 50% increase in capacity, which is huge as a small tweak, right? Like, that's a huge small, it's like, oh, this week we need a little more capacity. Let's bring in a third person. It's like suddenly we have 50% more capacity. And now my job went from actually doing work to training someone and managing them to make sure they have stuff to do, because now we have 50% more capacity.
Yeah. Well, maybe the question really comes back to like, this would require a lot of interrogation, but it might be, is the problem actually a labor shortage? I.e., is the problem actually a labor bottleneck? Or is it a leveling issue? Or is it just an information flow issue, which you could also maybe view as a leveling issue?
Right.
Like people knowing what to do when.
Could also be like batching, right? That you're batching tasks instead of flowing.
There's so much there that I think it's sort of like an amorphous, like very busy picture, and it's hard. I think it's easy to say, well, I'm going to say, I do believe we need more labor in my shop, but I think it's also easy to be like, this is just that there's too much work for us all to do. And I think like everything in this, it seems like is like paradoxical a little bit, but I think backing out far enough to see the picture well enough to see where people are wasting their time. Yeah. Or just not even wasting their time, but just like maybe doing the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah. Like the right thing at the wrong time.
The right thing at the wrong time, rather. Yeah. It's probably one of those situations where it's like, yes, you need more labor, but you probably don't need as much as you think.
Right. And I think here's the catch-22 in my head. And this is maybe where you get back to like, you just got to do an hour a day. Yeah. I don't have the labor to improve the processes, right? It feels like. Yeah. And so it sort of feels like you could hire someone to come in to fix your problems. I mean, it doesn't work, right? From what I can tell, like other people don't seem to have good luck with like hiring consultants to implement better systems.
I was going to say, if you do hire another person, it is actually very helpful.
Yeah, no, I can see hiring someone. I don't think I'd hire someone to do improvements. Right. I think I'd hire them to do the work that is systemized. And then I would work on improvements and training them to do improvements, something like that. I have a little thing here. I mean, how are we doing on time? I was just thinking about this, and I think this is probably said a million different ways, but this popped into my head and it felt like a very useful, very clear picture. So the further production ratios differ from the ratio and cadence of stuff leaving your shop, the more inefficiency you have. So I was just thinking about,
by production ratios, do you mean like one part to another part?
Yeah, so
of
if
an
you have
assembly.
Yeah, if you have an assembly, or I mean, even if you're shipping orders of individual pieces, so the further that ratio differs from the cadence, that can work both ways. If we're shipping one part this week and a different part next week, you could also make the argument, there's counter arguments to be sure, but you can make the argument that you should machine them in the order that they're needed. The counter argument has to do with the total supply chain jerking, the total supply chain, right? Like if the materials are different, suddenly I'm asking for a lot of one material, then a lot of a different material.
Sure.
So then, but I think that more has to do with the time scale you're kind of looking at, right? So if you zoom out to a year and say, and this is where production leveling comes in, right? If you zoom out to a year and say, this is our ratio of parts, they should all be happening in that ratio down to the day or down to the hour or down to, I mean, there's so many things to balance. But I was just, Sam had a question about essentially increasing our batch size or decreasing our batch size. And it almost always, when looking at the station, makes sense to increase your batch size. And it almost always makes less sense from an organizational perspective. And I just thought a good way of visualizing it is what is actually leaving our shop, in what ratios and in what cadence, and how do we approach that with production. Like if we make 72 pins, right now our batch size for pins is 72. If we say increase that to 500, suddenly our CNC is tied up for half a day instead of an eighth of a day. Right. And so that really messes us up on other fronts because we don't actually use 500 pins at once. We use them mixed in with a cam and a body. And so it should really go one cam, one body, one pin, one cam, one body, one pin. Which it doesn't.
Theoretically,
at the moment.
I mean, it seems like this, theoretically, Kanban should level your inventory. It should be a effective inventory, control method. So maybe it really just comes back to like trying reducing your batch sizes again.
I think so. I think I just think it's worth like as a I think it's just very clear to see what's leaving the shop as a benchmark for upstream processes. Because once you get upstream, it can start to feel muddy and hard to tell and hard to see what would be the most efficient answer for a given station or process. And that's, so
for you, probably relatively easy information to get.
Yeah, it definitely is.
It'd be kind of cool just to divide that by like working days and say like our batch size for each part should be equivalent to how many of these we ship on average in a day.
That would be cool.
And we make one batch of each thing per day.
I have dreams of a machine with a big trunnion on it with a bunch of vices that do all of our parts. And then a way to load those all in the ratio we want, so we could just tell it in that day what parts we want to make.
That'd be cool. There's this video floating around of a Hermla with this huge, like, it's got a robot part loading thing with, I think the jaws the grippers must be adjustable, and I think the vice jaws are maybe auto adjustable. And then it has this rack of like, I don't know, 500 different stock sizes.
Jeez.
And it actually has Kanban in the name. I don't know. It's in German, but it's like Mitsubishi Kanban. But I think the concept, right, is like you just to order based, individual parts, make one, make this one, make that one. It doesn't tackle the second op side of it. Like you still have a side to finish off, which you'd have to figure out how to do somehow. But you're not the only one thinking about that.
Certainly not. Yeah, for sure.
But that would be very cool.
Another fun insight from this week.
Actually, sorry, one more thing on that. Maybe a simple, like, it's cool to like dream about that, but maybe a simple bite-sized piece would be to say within within a part family,
Yeah.
we're going to do
Right.
like have 3/4 setup that does the 3 parts for 3/4.
Yeah.
And then
I wonder if I
1
could
inch.
get that on one vice jaw.
I think that's maybe.
I mean, in my case, it might make sense to put in that engineering time because like that part is fairly stable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That would be cool.
That would be super cool.
You'd have to have multiple gripper fingers or grippers.
Probably, yeah. I do have one spare tool pocket at the moment, so.
Interesting.
Interesting. So we, Sam wrote a bunch of SOPs.
Yeah.
And his takeaway, which I thought was very interesting and insightful, was he was kind of like, the harder the SOP is to write, I feel like indicates
It's a flag.
a bad process.
Interesting.
And I was like, that is a very good point.
Huh.
And it almost makes it more, I feel like often you have this thing where we've had this, where you put off doing some very simple analysis. And then the second you do the analysis, it's so like glaring and in your face.
Yeah.
That you're like, wow, this is like, I knew that I would get this answer, but suddenly seeing this answer just makes it so clear to me.
Yeah.
We had that with like internal versus external setup times. We went from a 14-minute changeover to a 7-minute changeover just by clearly identifying the first step of SMED, single minute exchange of dies, is identifying stuff that has to happen with the machine stopped and stuff that doesn't. And just by going through all the things that need to happen and saying this is internal and that's external, we cut it from 14 minutes to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is funny because it's such a simple act of going through and differentiating, but somehow like writing it out in SOP, it's like really slaps you in the face of like, your system sucks, right? It's like, there's a lot of little fiddly stuff. There's a lot of like, notice this detail. And if it's like this, nudge that thing this way a little bit, or like put pressure on it against this wall so that it's registered correctly. Like there's just, and it starts to point at like all these little details that A, you have to teach for someone else to do that process. And B, if someone forgets to do it, you end up with defects. And so it's bad in all those ways.
Yeah.
So you just have to hire someone to fix those problems.
Hire a consultant. May or may not work.
No, don't hire a consultant. Yeah.
Interesting.
Or I should say, the only thing I've seen that does work for hiring consultants, it seems like reliably, is hiring consultants to help you build a lean culture, to help teach people lean. It doesn't really help to come tell you how to do lean. Yeah. Like, oh, here, we'll Kanban this for you, and we'll do a value stream analysis here, and we'll that doesn't seem to have lasting effects.
Yeah. I think I have a friend who listens to this. Hi, Grant. We had a conversation this week, and he was like, what do you think I should put some time into? I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know your system well enough to even have a place to start. And I don't know if I'm particularly good at this to begin with. Like, I think I'm starting to understand my own system well, like totally. Just barely well enough to see holes and see places where I need to put improvement efforts. But like walking into other people's shops, I'm like, this looks sweet.
Nice shop. This looks great.
Right on. I wish I could work here. This is cool.
Trade my problems for someone else's.
Yeah, exactly. One last thought. So I read the goal this last week. Oh, last thought on the goal. I feel like I was expecting it to be extremely painful read. Okay. Because everyone was like, it's fiction, but about manufacturing.
I feel like I'm mostly that guy.
I think everybody has basically said that.
Okay,
like,
cool.
He's a terrible writer. And I was like, oh, God, this is going to be a slog. I loved it.
That's awesome.
It was like, I feel like it was kind of like, for a manufacturing nerd, it was like a rom-com sort of. Like it had enough like tidbits in there to be like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But then it was just like this easy breezy kind of like, I literally like stayed up till midnight reading.
That's awesome. I should, a real page turner.
I should add that I'm like fairly starved for entertainment lately. But, but I really I had a great,
That's awesome.
I had a great time. I think also being familiar enough with these concepts already, like I kind of knew where he was going.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna pull it off.
Really gonna show it. That's funny.
But there was I think it is a worthwhile maybe method of doing informational exchange, because my experience,
Fiction.
yeah,
Okay.
or at least these kind of more drawn out, like he kind of has, I don't know, 4 or 5 concepts, maybe not even that many,
Right.
in the book that he's really trying to get across, and he does it in these very drawn out incremental phases, and it gives you time to chew on them in a way that often a textbook style is. Often I find myself in a textbook, like reading a sentence and being like, do I understand that? No.
Yeah.
Okay, read it again.
Mm-hmm.
Do I understand it? No. Okay, I guess I'm going to set this book down now
Yeah.
and come back when I think I understand that. And then it's like a year later, I'm like halfway through the book and I'm like, huh. So I feel like textbook stuff, you often are like, you get through the book and maybe like you have 1/8 of it that you've actually like digested fully at best maybe. And this book, I was like, I feel like I got most of what he was like trying to get across here. So that was kind of cool. But
yeah.
it inspired a lot of thought
That's
this last
awesome.
week. And one thing was just about lead times just generally and how to lower them. And this is not an actionable thing immediately, but I really am thinking that maybe bringing anodizing in-house would make a lot of sense for our business.
Music to my ears, my friend. Yeah.
Music to my customers' ears too.
We should compare notes.
Yeah,
/ get a shop together and just share an anodized line.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's that one.
Yeah.
But just like looking at kind of like our value add chain.
Interesting.
Not that I haven't actually done a value stream map yet, though I did some research. There's this like huge gap at the end of our production process where we're just waiting.
I can see that. I have 2 quotes out right now where people want anodized and they're in a hurry. And I'm like, yeah, if we do anodized, that adds like 3 to 6 weeks. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what to tell you. And it's sort of, I think the problem is that it's out of your hands. And so a lot of people treat it as sort of just a given. Instead of what you're saying is this is a fixable problem.
Maybe.
Right. If you had it in-house, it would be a much faster turnaround.
Yeah, and we might not make money specifically on the process. Like I'm guessing for a while we probably wouldn't.
Yeah, maybe even lose money.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like then this comes back to the process versus operations thing. Like viewed individually, I'm sure that station would not make money for a while.
Right.
But viewed in the context of how much work we could ship in a month or in a year.
Interesting.
I think it probably would be a big benefit, potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
And just like from an internal scheduling thing, being able to be like, okay, this is a rush job, this has become a rush job because we have to tack on a week for anodizing and the customer needs it by this date. Whereas if we could do it in-house, we could not interrupt our flow potentially.
Right.
Put it in where it makes sense, run each part individually through anodizing as it comes off the machine.
Yeah. And
have an order ready to go on time. I know there's a lot about it that would be very appealing.
Yeah, no, I
aside from
I'm right there with you. I mean, that's partly why I'm doing the paint, honestly.
Yeah, in-house.
It's just because I can do it in-house easily.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's easier than anodize in some ways.
Yeah, so that's an ongoing, there's literally nowhere we could stick it right now in our space physically, I think. But it seems like a very good avenue to explore in the future.
Yeah. Also,
we need more labor, but I think we'll need labor anyway.
Anodize feels very, definitely racking is a human thing.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Yeah.
But the rest of the process seems like if you could pony up the cash, automation would be so good.
Yeah.
And it's really a timing sensitive thing. So like someone forgetting to pull something from a tank is...
Oh, automation for the dipping process? Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And for our parts, we don't I mean, there's some things we run large quantities of, but often it's not a huge, like racking, I don't think is going to be a massive thing. Like we probably spend more time right now packing. And then re-unpacking when it comes back.
Again, yeah.
And we're spending like around, I haven't actually done a hard calculation, but I think it's about $1,000 a month that we spend on shipping back and forth to anodizing.
Yeah.
And
there's your profit, even if your station doesn't make money.
Exactly. Some of that we pass through to the customer.
Sure. But then someone's paying for it.
Someone's paying for it.
Yeah.
Some of it we don't pass through to the customer, depending on the customer. And so it's either going to be savings to the customer or it's going to be more profit in our pocket, depending on how we decide to handle it.
Either flowing more value to the customer or profit to you. So both are good.
Yeah. Maybe we'll meet somewhere in the middle.
There you go.
Well, that's probably a good note to end on for the week, or for the episode, rather.
Yep.
You can find us at Incremental CI on Instagram. You can find me at Lycan_MFG on Instagram.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram.
Keep posting and reaching out. We love the conversations. And
yeah.
We will see you in a couple days.